Hello, and welcome to Ipsy Dixit, a podcast on legal scholarship. I'm your host, Liu Nguyen, a college student and the co-founder of the Oberlin Policy Research Institute, an undergraduate public policy research organization based at Oberlin College. My guest today is Melanie Reid, Associate Dean of Faculty and Professor of Law at Lincoln Memorial University Duncan School of Law. We will discuss her article, A CSI Story, The Past, Present, and Future of Crime Scene Collection and What Litigators Need to Know in the Wake Forest Journal of Law and Policy. Welcome, Professor Reid.
Thank you for having me.
So let's begin by talking about why did you write this article and what's the major arguments within your paper?
Well, I originally had been asked to teach a class to police officers at the National Forensic Academy School in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, at the Law Enforcement Innovation Center. They take a 10-week course of forensic science, and they wanted to also learn a little bit about trial advocacy or testifying at trial as a crime scene investigator. And what I noticed when I met with law enforcement that collect evidence, they seem to really have very little guidance from local police departments or from their local prosecutors as to specific protocols, as to how they should collect evidence or how they should testify about what they've learned about. And so that kind of got me thinking, wow, I think I really need to look further into this and do some research as to how this whole idea of crime scene collection has evolved, and is there any kind of magic protocol that has to be done. And plus, with the interest in the CSI shows on TV and things like that, I kind of wanted to see if reality has any bearing on what we see on TV. And of course, there's a huge disconnect there. So that kind of got me thinking about writing this paper.
So can you talk a little bit about crime scene investigators, what they look like in the real world?
Well, crime scene investigators, what I've learned it's varied. A lot of little smaller police departments really don't have the resources to have like this team of CSIs that go in every time to collect evidence at crime scenes. So what we see is really, police that are first responders sometimes have the job of preserving the scene, collecting evidence from the scene. And so really there's a lot of on-the-job training. And of course, in bigger police departments and of course, like the FBI, they have specific teams that are dedicated to crime scene collection. But really, it depends on the particular police department. And again, since there's really not much uniformity, it really depends on what kind of training they give their particular crime scene investigators as far as what they're going to collect, how they're going to collect it, how many photographs they're going to take. Are they going to do diagrams? Are they going to lift fingerprints, things like that? There's a lot of discretion in the field.
So let's talk about the history of the field, particularly the evolution of crime scene management. In your paper, you talk a little bit about what it looked like in the 19th century, bringing up the case of the 1840 prosecution of Richard Gould. Can you expand on what crime scene investigation looked like from the 1800s throughout the 19th century?
Yeah, what I wanted to look at is when did forensic science become popular or accepted as far as being a law enforcement tool? So I started looking and doing some historical research and started seeing in for example, in England, like you mentioned, the Richard Gould case in 1840. Really what would happen is, police would arrive. There was, on that particular case, there were two surgeons that came, and essentially they were just witnesses to show what the crime scene looked like. So he was murdered in his house. He lived alone. He had been tied up with some rope, beaten badly. And so they really, obviously, there wasn't any kind of DNA testing back then, because DNA really wasn't on the scene until about 1987. So they really didn't collect much evidence. They could just really describe the scene, and were able to say that the killer used a chisel and a blunt round object to strike the victim. The surgeons could tell how long ago perhaps the body had been warm and when this crime could have occurred. But back then, they didn't test for latent fingerprints or investigate bloodstain patterns or really do anything of that nature. So really, people that were on the scene at the time really just were used as eyewitnesses to what the scene looked like. And then they really had to use circumstantial evidence along with other people that could supply the motive. And in the Richard Gold case, they had a buddy of the defendant to say that he was really hard up for money at the time, and he had been seen later that day in blood-stained clothes, and they had found some coins hidden in his bedroom. So really, at the time, there wasn't really any forensic science around, and so you could see that there was a lot of times where people, could be considered innocent, but yet were found guilty based on solely murder and what was motive and what was seen by the policeman at the time at the time they found the body. So really, we didn't see much forensic science until fingerprints came around, and that was around the early 1900s.
So now let's move forward to a relatively more recent case where there are these forensic science techniques, but there are a whole host of mistakes. In your paper, you spent some time talking about the 1994 Oj Simpson case. Can you expand on that a little bit here?
Yes. The reason why I picked Oj Simpson is because there's such a plethora of information about what happened during that investigation and during that trial. So what Barry Scheck had, because he was one of the ones, and F. Lee Bailey were the two that really did a lot of cross-examination of the crime scene investigator, criminalist as they call him, Dennis Fung, and Officer Risk, who was the first police officer on the scene. But what they had that most defense attorneys don't have is they had a lot of media coverage at the time that Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson's bodies were found. So it's a real fascinating case to see how they used all this extra information to create phenomenal cross-examinations of the crime scene investigators. And so what I wanted to do was kind of to point out to defense attorneys ways that they can take a look at what CSIs have collected and attack it in cross-examination. And so that's what I did.
And there was a more recent case in Italy that had some of these same mistakes, the Amanda Knox case. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Amanda Knox was, she was accused of murdering her roommate in Italy. And they had a very similar issue there, in the sense that the crime scene had really been contaminated very early on. One of the biggest issues that a lot of defense attorneys will attack is the preservation of the crime scene itself. So both in the case of Oj Simpson and the Amanda Knox case, there were a lot of law enforcement that were walking around in the stepping basically on evidence, and that can create a problem of contamination. So it was really effective, for example, for the Oj Simpson's defense team to continually hammer to the jury, that the evidence was contaminated, compromised, and corrupted. And they were able to compare, for example, like the LAPD protocol on how to collect evidence and compare it to what was done on the scene to make the criminalist, Dennis Fung, look like he had really screwed up, because he They did not arrive on the scene until 10 hours after the body had been found. So several police had been walking around the scene. They covered Nicole Brown Simpson's body with a blanket that they had found inside the house, and therefore they could argue that the blanket had cross-contaminated the body and contained secondary transfer of trace evidence of perhaps OJ's DNA from the blanket inside her house onto her body. And so those kinds of things, it's easier to find the information in the Oj Simpson case because we have the exact transcript in which the defense basically attacked the fact that it was the scene was improperly preserved. The criminalists arrived on the scene later. They were able to show that photographs taken before they arrived showed that pieces of evidence had been moved by the time that the criminalists had arrived there. And in the Amanda Knox case, we don't have as much because obviously that was an Italian trial and they don't have jury trials. They're more reviewed by the judges there, but they had the same exact issues. And again, a lot of this goes back to this idea of we need uniform guidelines for these crime scene investigators, so we have a base in which we can compare what they did to what the basic protocol should be.
So can you expand a little bit on uniform guidelines and what that should look like?
Well, it's interesting because when I talk to law enforcement that's involved in crime scene collection, I've always asked them, could you give me the Bible for crime scene collection and preservation of evidence, or how you collect fingerprints or track impressions or video record or photograph a crime scene or create sketches? And there's not one particular source where everybody goes to. And so I think that's the problem with this idea of uniformity, because some people will focus on a particular book, a crime scene investigation book by Barry Fisher or Richard Safferstein, or they'll have taken like a criminal justice background in college, and they subscribe to a particular method of crime scene collection, but there's just really not one source. And so there's some obvious things that they all will agree upon. Obviously you should be wearing gloves on the scene. Obviously you should be having you wear booties on your feet or eyewear. And so, but nobody has ever gotten together and had one group discuss creating uniform guidelines that CSIs should be following. And to that end, it is a little difficult to say there should be only one way because of the fact that crime scenes do vary. So obviously, if there was weather concerns or there's public safety issues that they have to rush the way that they collect the evidence, or maybe it's the nature of the crime. So you're working on a burglary case, you might not be taking as many fingerprints or collecting as much evidence as if it was a murder case. But a lot of it, I notice, really has to do with the discretion of the CSI themselves. Am I going to collect this evidence? Am I going to cut out this piece of carpet and take it back to determine if there's, DNA on this, or if there's a lot of trash that's located behind the house? Do I collect all of it? Do I collect some of it? And so there's a lot of judgment calls that are also involved on the scene that has to be taken into account. But that said, I still believe that I think that just like with all the different forensic science, the fingerprints, the examination of tire track impressions or bloodstain patterns, things of that nature, the National Academy of Sciences has come out saying we really need a lot more uniformity and guidelines in those forensic sciences. We probably should be doing the same thing when it comes to crime scene collection.
So within your paper, you talk about improving the discovery process when it comes to crime scenes and criminal trials. How should that be approached?
Well, I think a lot of times, first of all, I don't think most lawyers, unless they have some sort of criminal justice background, really are familiar with crime scene evidence collection, preservation of evidence, and what CSIs actually do in the field. And therefore, I think they take a scattershot approach at trial when they cross-examine CSIs on the stand, and maybe at best ask a few questions to kind of suggest to the jury that there was some sloppy police work that was done on the scene. So I think what might be a good idea is to have prosecutors connect with CSIs prior to trial to find out whether there were any kind of deviations from their police department's protocol when it involves crime scene collection. That way, that could give the heads up to the defense as far as whether there's something there that they need to explore, because at this point in time, they're not familiar with crime scene collection techniques, and we don't have in normal cases this OJ dream team that has, a year plus to go over the evidence and have the benefit of a media videotaping the CSI's every movement. So I think it would be worthwhile to have prosecutors make that connection, because then that also establishes a better relationship between prosecutors and the CSIs to see what exactly was going on at the crime scene at the time, how the evidence was preserved and collected, and they can learn a little bit more about that. And then if there really wasn't any kind of deviation between what was done and the typical protocol that's demanded by the police department, then that's maybe not something that the defense needs to spend time on the trial. So I think that would kind of be of a benefit to all players involved.
And in regards to trials, what are the responsibilities of crime scene investigators when they get up on the stand? And even prior to the beginning of the case, what should the responsibilities of those professionals be?
I think they need to really, need to be sure that they feel like they're properly trained. And if there is some sort of on-the-job training, that there is a supervisor at hand that can help them and assist them in learning how to do this. I think some of the concerns really revolve around the time pressure situations that there are on CSIs at the time that they are called to a crime scene, because usually it's pretty chaotic. It could be in the middle of the night. It could be hectic. And if you're not properly trained, it could be that you miss certain items, or do improper sketches or diagrams or improper collection. I mean, I know even in the OJ case, Dennis Fung was a well-known criminalist, had been there for many years, but mistakes were made, and even understanding appropriate evidence collection, that blood stains should be placed in paper bags rather than plastic bags, because plastic can contaminate the evidence. I mean, simple things like that to make sure your CSIs are properly trained is very, very important.
So let's talk a little bit about the credibility of crime scene investigators. And you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but the show CSI kind of presents a different kind of view of crime scene investigators. So what should crime scene investigators make known to juries and courts before they testify based on their credibility?
Well, I think the CSI effect has definitely hurt actual crime scene investigators, because I think juries expect that they're going to find fingerprints and DNA evidence every time. And I think that CSIs need to be trained to be able to explain to the jury, in reality, it's very difficult to get a fingerprint off a weapon, or DNA collection varies depending on the weather, whether it's an outside crime scene, inside crime scene, things like that. But, one of the biggest things that really I found in speaking to police and CSIs is that there really is not a lot of discussion and preparation with prosecutors prior to trial. And sometimes CSIs aren't even asked to testify at a criminal trial because evidence can be introduced using like the case agent if he was at the scene or he becomes familiar with the CSI's notes and is able to admit the evidence through the case agent. So what I think we need to do is start appreciating the job of the CSIs a little bit more and putting them into the trial team and listen to what they have to say, because I think we miss out on learning important details of the crime scene, the importance of evidence. Why did you photograph this? What is this? What photos would you introduce at trial? What were some of the weaknesses in the evidence collection at the time? And I think those are the only things that the CSIs that were on the scene that did this can actually talk about with the prosecutors. And I just noticed there really isn't enough communication. And I think that will really bolster their credibility on the stand if they're properly prepared by the prosecutors.
And what's the particular responsibilities of prosecutors in regards to crime scene investigators within a criminal trial? What should be their responsibilities and what are they right now?
I think prosecutors really need to try to work on law enforcement relations. And I think a lot of times law enforcement feels like they're just brought in at the last minute and their voice hasn't been heard. And so I think prosecutors really need to try to make an effort to make CSIs and law enforcement part of that team and properly prepare them. And also learn a little bit more about evidence collection and preservation so they are just as familiar with the police department's protocols as the defense, because we need to prepare law enforcement as a prosecutor for cross-examination. And I think that they're going to strengthen their government's case if prosecutors take more time to talk to the CSIs prior to trial.
And for defense attorneys, what should they know about this entire process? What do they know right now, and what should they be knowing in the future?
Well, I think that the most important would be to, in any case, to first ask for the CSI's police department protocols, because I don't think unfortunately, I think a lot of police departments create vague protocols on purpose, but I think that it's important to learn about the CSI's training and the protocols that they're supposed to follow, because that's the best way to compare it to what was done in this particular case. And ask for the field reports, ask for the particular sketches, maps, diagrams, photographs, what fingerprints were taken, blood stain, patterns, shooting incident reconstruction, whatever the case may be. Try to get all that information and compare it to the particular protocols. That's going to be your strongest cross-examination questions, other than the standard sloppy police work questions that the defense usually do. But I think that's really powerful, because again, that was one of the strongest points that the defense had in the Oj Simpson case, was continually going back to the mantra that the evidence was contaminated, compromised, and corrupted. So I think that is really strong, powerful points in front of the jury.
And for the big question, why, in your opinion, does all of this matter?
I think because, I hear a lot about, especially after that report came out in 2009 of the National Academy of Sciences, saying that expert witnesses are overstating matches that they find from bite marks or blood spatter, or fingerprint matches or hair, things like that. And they keep focusing on the forensic science. And I think that's important. But really, other than watching, CSI on TV, we really haven't scratched the surface about, well, what about on the front end? How is this stuff collected? And I think everybody in the criminal justice system is kind of missing the boat, whether that be prosecutors or defense attorneys, in kind of getting an understanding of what happens as soon as a crime occurs. There's somebody on the front line that is trying to do their job, and we need to understand that a little bit more so we can be able to identify any kind of issues that might have popped up and show that to the jury at trial.
And for my final question, what should lawyers, judges, and investigative agencies take away from your paper?
I think that I would hope that what I would love to accomplish is, first of all, increase communication between prosecutors and CSIs, particularly before trial as they're conducting a trial strategy. And I would hope that I'm trying to push better communication between prosecutors and defense when there are issues of crime scene collection at the scene, by requesting that they reveal these things to defense in discovery. And lastly, I just kind of want everybody to kind of have an appreciation of how far we've come in such a short time. I mean, if you see in 1840, we didn't have any of these forensic science techniques that we have today. So we've really come a long way in just, a very short time. And I think that crime scene collection is still evolving. And so if anything, I'd love to shed a little bit of light of what's gone on in the past, and hopefully in the future we can improve these methods.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Reid, for coming on the podcast to talk about your work.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Now we take you directly to Scotland Yard, where we'll be joining that famous detective Sherlock Holmes, who will be looking for clues as to why Satan is tearing up homes today across the land. And now let's join Sherlock Holmes. Oh, pip pip chitty-o there, my friends. How are you today? Sherlock Holmes here. Yes, hello, Mrs. America. How are you?
Fine. How are you?
Oh, I'm just fine. You know something, Mrs. America? I've been put on a very important assignment from Scotland Yard here to find out exactly some of the devices Satan is using to, attack homes today. Yes, and I'd like to look around here. Why don't you look around where you're at, and let's see if we can find some of these important clues, okay?
Clues?
Yes, clues. K-L-U-E-S is clues.
See, all right.
Yes. You look over there, and I'll look over here.
Good idea.
Yes. I'll just move away here for a second, see if I can find any clues. Have you found any clues, Mr. America?
No, not yet.
No clues? Oh, my George, I got a clue here. Look at this. I got a clue right here.
Oh, what'd you find?
Oh, look, just read that right now.
Astrology.
Oh, yes, pip. Yes, how about that? You know, Mr. America, many people, they start reading the horoscope column in the newspaper, and they get hooked on it. Yes, they find there are hundreds of books and magazines about the effects of stars and planets on their own lives. And do you realize, Mrs. America, there are even horoscopes for pets?
Oh,
no. Yes, this is a trick of the devil. Astrology is simply an open door to demon power. Oh, no, I certainly hope someone listening to this today isn't indulging in astrology.
I hope so, too.
Yes, God wants you to live by faith.
That's right.
Amen. Look around this so we can find some more clues, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? Oh, look over there, Mr. America. There's a couple of bars of soaps.
Soap?
Ah, yes, soap operas. Afternoon soap operas, yes. Oh, no, Mr. America, look. Right over there beside the soap, it happens to be a reel of... Let me look at it real close. Let me examine it with my magnifying glass. Yes. Oh, no. It says X-rated movies, R-rated movies, and filthy movies. Oh, no, this reel of film is filthy movies, Mr. America. Yes, and over there, look over there on the table. You see that pile of 45 records?
Yeah?
Yes, that's all rock and roll or worldly music.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no, yes. And do you realize, Miss America, that thousands who call themselves Christians are trapped by these instruments of Satan?
Oh.
Yes, they hum songs glorifying drunkenness, and they sing songs that condemn Christianity. Yes, and they bring movies based on sex, gambling, and crime into their living rooms. Oh, this is terrible, Mrs. America. Why, some of them even watch programs day after day about adultery, hatred, drugs, and perversion.
Oh.
You know what, Mrs. America? A mind filled with garbage like this is only an entry point for Satan's power.
That's right.
Oh, no, how terrible. I know. And look over there, Mrs. America. I see another. There's a sign over there. Do you read what that sign says?
Oh, depression.
Oh, yes. Oh, you know something, Miss America? If no other weapon seems to work, the devil often attacks in this way. Oh, I say, do you sometimes feel like, well, you're totally discouraged? Almost like giving up for no apparent reason at all?
Not me.
Oh, not me either, but there might be some people listening who maybe feel that once in a while. Have you ever been so down you felt like life wasn't worthy to live? Well, I tell you something, Miss America. I feel that suicide is a demon spirit, and it troubles a great many people today.
That's right.
Yes, and people who are troubled by demonic spirits like that to commit suicide, well, they often sometimes do feel that life isn't worth living. But you know something? The Bible tells us, yes, that Satan is as a roaring lion seeking about whom he may devour. And Jesus even said that Satan himself would desire to have you so that he might sift you as wheat.
That's right.
But you know something, Miss America? The Bible says the devil cannot stand against the power of God. So I know, boys and girls, as we pray, as we believe together, the Lord will bring freedom to people and to loved ones who want to be free and delivered from Satan's power.
Amen.
Yes, Miss America, Sherlock Holmes definitely believes that, well, if we obey God's word that says resist the devil will flee from us. Amen?
right.
That's very
Amen.
true. Well, I've got to go back to Scotland Yard to file my report, as we found several devices today that but are being used by Satan to tear up and to destroy the homes across the land today. So, hip hip, cheerio, goodbye, see you later.